Residente Malvado. Just realized this is my second video and I'm already talking about another Capcom series. Well, anyway, the series that didn't create the survival horror, but definitely brought it into the mainstream. Horror in video games is no new thing, especially now where the genre is oversaturated with gore-fest, chase simulators, and jump scare roller coasters. But before all of that, the pinnacle of horror in video games was the survival horror genre, and the lead of this genre was Resident Evil. I still remember my first time experiencing Resident Evil, watching my dad play Resident Evil 3 on the PlayStation 1, and being terrified of Nemesis and the fact that he could just show up anywhere. I mean, look at this damn thing. Could you blame me for being scared of this guy? Even his redesign in the remake is still nightmare fuel. I was so intimidated by the franchise as a kid that I didn't even watch the movies, which in hindsight was probably a good thing. But eventually my balls would drop and I would gain a new interest in horror, and I would pick up the games for myself and try them out, and the rest is essentially Adamant lore. I've experienced the series' ups, downs, weird choices, and bizarre choices. Seriously, what the fuck is RE-verse? Why did they make this? But anyways, the first game that would break me into returning to Resident Evil was Resident Evil 4 for the GameCube, and boy, what a way to experience the series again for the first time.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
I was so confused at first. I thought the enemies were zombies, but I'm fighting crazy village people with chainsaws and sickles. What? You can roundhouse people? The more I played it, however, the confusion turned into enjoyment, and the further I got into the game, I fell more and more in love with the story, the characters, the cheesy dialogue, and the gameplay. I thought this was a horror franchise. This is way too much fun to be terrifying. Since then, I've played nearly all of the Resident Evil games, except the absolute poopy ones that are really hard to find, and came to learn that Resident Evil 4 is actually considered the pinnacle of the series, much to my surprise at the time. I mean, it's fantastic. It's definitely one of the most influential games to ever release, one of my favorite games of all time, and to this day is one of the greatest games ever made. But it's not the best Resident Evil game, at least in my opinion, which is the topic of this video. Well, what is the best RE title, you ask? What game could you possibly believe defeats the magnum opus that is Resident Evil 4? Well, I think that the best Resident Evil game is actually... Sorry, I couldn't even handle it as a joke. Okay, anyway. Resident Evil Remake is still the best Resident Evil in the entire series. Now, some people will say, well, that's not a hot take, while others will flat out disagree and say, nah, the new ones outdo this game. In which I respond to both sides, yeah, you're right, in some aspects. While the newer titles that came after Remake are way more refined in their design, I feel that, at least for me, the series has never nailed its presentation and themes more overall than with Resident Evil Remake. Either way, I'd like to explain why I believe Remake is the best RE experience in comparison to Resident Evil 4 or any of the other Resident Evil titles that have been close to being given this moniker of the best experience in the franchise. So sit back, relax, and let me take you into the world of the greatest survival horror. I have always felt since the beginning that the narrative of Resident Evil has always aimed to evoke that B horror film energy. Characters that are blind to their situation and do things no rational human being would do, monsters that challenge their human understanding and common sense, and something bigger acting as a catalyst of said situation, supernatural or otherwise. RE has always been goofy, and Remake is no exception. However, though silly, I personally felt the story of the game was a lot more intimidating than the others. Comparing it to the original game, characters' dialogue and interactions were more feasible and better delivered for the most part. Story pacing is satisfying and never feels like a slog, and the deeper you go, the more and more you learn the truth of what is going on. 4 has similar notes, but the one thing that it doesn't is that horror feel, as the dialogue and choreography make it feel more like an action movie with horror elements that you can play. Once again, I love it. I'm not saying it's bad. I just feel that the survival horror moniker gets thrown out of the window once I start suplexing people, having knife fights, and getting flashbanged by hot Asian women in red dresses. There's nothing wrong with that. Remake has a story that I feel is really successful at getting you interested in finding what lies beneath the surface, while also having the player still be hesitant towards seeing it. Piecing it all together as the player through dialogue, notes, and exploration is really effective in making the entire experience feel dreadful no matter which of your two protagonists you control. To me, this is Resident Evil at its finest, and Resident Evil Remake does it the most effectively, which is why it stands taller than the others as my favorite story in the franchise. A mansion is one of the most titular and perfect settings for horror in general. The vast landscape creates the perfect veil for the horrors that lie within. That being said, the Spencer Mansion is awesome. It is the origin point from which the series would take itself to radical extremes, later going on to cities and eventually international, and though it's only the beginning, nothing tops it. Every area and room is soaked in that dreadful atmosphere I brought up previously, no matter if it's the main hall, the dining room, the courtyard, or the goddamn bathroom. Not to mention the architecture and mechanisms leave you effectively asking more questions than you get answers for, which works for horror in making you feel more tense due to things that are nigh unexplainable. Who designed all these elaborate ways to get around? Why are there doors locked behind art puzzles? Why would someone lock essential items needed for travel through the house behind things as convoluted as playing a piano properly or finding a fake key inside of a dog collar to replace a real key in a room that kills you if you don't have it? Resident Evil. I know lots of people may say this is just RE being RE, or say that these things are dumb, but in my opinion they're effective at making you ask the question, what the hell is happening? Which is an integral question that should be uttered or thought when experiencing horror, no matter what kind of medium you're experiencing it in. RE4 has a great setting as well, with a similar approach to design that makes you question what you're getting yourself into, but it's hard to feel dread personally when things get so silly. Not to mention Leon being too badass of a character for me to be scared. I feel that in Resident Evil 4 you're never really asking the question of what is happening, but rather what's next, as you're anticipating more and more goofy stuff as the game goes on, which to me detracts from the survival horror aspect of it. Spain is not a bad setting, but the Spencer Mansion is unbeatable. So here's probably going to be where the split happens. I believe that control is integral to the horror experience, as limiting your character's ability in general allows for more thought to go into your decisions throughout. Let's not dance around it. Unless you grew up with these kinds of games, nobody likes tank controls. Most think that the stiff movement makes the game arduous to play and gets you in situations you cannot avoid. I don't think I know a single person who likes this control style, except me. Yeah, I think tank controls are purposefully implemented to add to the game's feel, and with Remake, it's expertly executed. I admire and adore the modern controls of newer games simply because, as one who plays video games, I would like to believe that I died because of me and not the game. RE4 is the interesting middle ground where it is still tank, but enhanced, allowing for a better degree of control thanks to being fully 3D, as opposed to having pre-rendered backgrounds like its predecessors. However, for me, tank controls are at the forefront of the RE experience because it adds so much to the game. Now, not only do you have to navigate your surroundings effectively, you have to manipulate your character effectively as well. This can make or break the player honestly, but once it clicks, and you start to understand your placement against enemies and hazards, no matter if you're being offensive or trying to dodge conflict to ration your items. It's an effective way to create stress for the player, as you now have to manage your play on top of every other aspect you have to keep in mind as you play more and more, personifying that label of survival horror. Alright, now we've spoke about all of the technical jargon regarding why I think this game is tops, but when it all comes down to it, it all comes down to this last important factor. Horror media is at its finest, not when you are terrified for a moment, but uncomfortable throughout the entire experience. Tension is the key to a truly horrifying situation, and especially in video games, is the ultimate factor in what makes your media or game effective or not. With that being said, this one thing, higher than any other aspect, is why I hold Resident Evil Remake in such high regard as the best RE game, an experience that to this day has not been topped. Resident Evil 4 is not exempt of tension and certainly has moments where there is nothing but pure malice and terror conveyed. But, as I have said before, I believe the other aspects of the game dwarf the vibe of horror and tension, as the story and characters, Leon especially, can cut the tension with a butter knife easily. Not to mention the game itself never gives you really any reason to feel tense or stressed, with design choices like the excellent inventory system, ammo being way more plentiful than previous games, and the merchant making the game more of an arcade experience than a survival horror experience. It's a more fun focused project and I love it for it. But Remake? I mean, there are moments where you can't help but facepalm, but it's so few and far between it's barely noticeable. No matter how many times I play this game, I always feel like I'm on my toes. Managing ammo, having the right items in my inventory, having enough space in my inventory, memorizing the map layout to make sure I don't get lost, solving puzzles, all the while dealing with zombies, crimson heads, dogs, hunters, spiders, a giant snake, a giant spider, fucking sharks. All these things, alongside the other aspects I've mentioned, come together and just make a game that is timeless and never fails to be engaging, entertaining, and terrifying to me. And by the end, after Tyrant murders Barry because I done goofed, I feel a satisfaction that so few games give me. This is a great game. This is a perfect survival horror. This is Resident Evil. Literally. Once again, I'd like to state that this in no way detracts from the awesomeness that is Resident Evil 4. I made this video not because of Resident Evil Remake, but because of Resident Evil 4, specifically Resident Evil 4's upcoming remake, which is going to be coming out pretty soon, because I'm really excited to see them approach 4 from a different perspective. A serious take on 4 is intriguing, and I believe if done well can elevate this new iteration to be my possible favorite game in the series. It really shows a lot of promise. But when all is said and done, at this moment, Resident Evil Remake is still survival horror peaked. It is the best Resident Evil. It is survival horror personified. Oh wait, I forgot one more very important thing that holds this game in high regard. Man, Jill is caked up crazy in this game.